So welcome to the session with, we have Mike and Sean with us here today. This is an interactive session, so please just hop in with any questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get you up here and answer your questions. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself first? And then Mike, if you would like to introduce yourself, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Amy. Yes, hello, everybody. My name's Sean McDougall. I'm an active home educator. I have a daughter who's 12 and she's never been to school, but would be in the first year of secondary school now if she was in that system. I'm also, I'm self-employed and I'm an innovation consultant, and I had a background in educational design. So I was quite unhappy with the British educational system and pleased when we discovered home education. And I'm also a trustee of the Centre for Personalised Education, which is very dear to my heart.
I'm Mike Reeve. I'm dad to 5 children. My youngest is coming up to a year and my oldest is just turned 10. Like Sean, all of our kids have been home educated from the start, never gone to school. I'm in a bit of a different position to Sean in that I work full time and my wife Amy is the primary educator. So for the purpose of this session, we've got quite a nice balance. We can talk about both perspectives on what it's like to be home educating dad. Sean, do you want to kick off with talking about how you came to decide to home educate your daughter?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I just said, if you go back far enough, I was working at the Design Council and I was running the Future Education team. And as part of that, I was able to go and have a look at the Danish education system, which is completely different to the British one. And it was a bit of an eye-opener, really. And when I later started our family, my daughter was 4.5 or something, and we went along to our local school open day, and the head teacher said, you know, when your child starts in reception, I mean, they'll be coming home and a few minutes after they get home, they'll be falling asleep, I mean, at the table. And, you know, don't worry, it's just an adjusting thing. They'll get used to it, and you know, we'll progress from there. And I was thinking, no, I don't want my daughter to be coming home so exhausted that she falls asleep immediately. And I was aware that in the European system, it was common for people to start at either 6 or 7. And my wife, who was also concerned, said, there's this thing called home education. And so we actually breathed a sigh of relief and said, we're not putting our child into that system. We'll do it ourselves until she's 7, and then maybe she can enter. And by the time we got to 7 years old, it was going quite well. So we thought we'll just carry on.
I think it's really funny that you mentioned the age 7 as the age, because I remember my oldest, when we first started home educating, she kept saying, I'll go to school when I'm 7, Dad. I'll go to school when I'm 7. And then she got to 7 and she decided that she never wanted to go to school. So we continued as we were, really.
Yeah. But how did you discover home education?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure how we discovered it, but I remember even as young as when my oldest was 2.5, we realized that she had a real love for learning, and she absolutely loved jigsaw. She was desperate to learn to read and count, and she was really thriving. But on the other hand, she is quite reserved socially, and while she enjoyed spending time with her friends, it would really tire her out, and she would need like a lot of rest time to recover from those social interactions. And when it got to sort of that time, which seems really early, it's like when they're 3.5, when you're meant to start applying for the schools, we just sort of started to think, well, actually, it's going really well at home and she's thriving. Why would we want to upset the apple cart here? And I think my wife knew a few people who were home educated, and she sort of tentatively mentioned it to me. And what we ended up doing was asking all the people who we knew who home educated all of the bad things about home education, because we could see all of the good things about it, but we didn't want to kind of go into a rose-tinted spectacle. And so we asked them, like, what are all of the cons of doing this? And what we found was that even the people who had home educated for a bit and it hadn't worked out and they'd ended up putting their children in school, they always said that they really valued that time where they had the children at home and that they didn't regret home educating one bit. And so we read about it lots. We tried to find as much research as we could to see if there really was any catch to it. And then as it happened, we actually moved house around the time that we were meant to be doing like all of the school visits and applications. And we just didn't have the capacity to do that on top of moving. And so we sort of put our money where our mouth was and said, okay, we're just not going to apply for schools. And where we moved to, we had a school at the end of our street. And so we sort of did it with, well, if this doesn't work out, then we can always send kids to a school up top of the street. I think for the first few years, that was very much how we played it. Every year we'd sort of put a veto on it for each family member. If they wanted to not do it and go to school, then that would be fine. We're now in our sixth year of doing it, and we have our moments where we're like, want to put our kids in school, you know, that the heat of a moment where you just sort of say, fine, well, you can go to school then. But it's never really been a serious consideration, because we just really have started to see the benefits, not just for our oldest, but two of our kids have quite unusual severe speech disorders, and our speech and language therapists have all said, you know, if your kids were in school, they wouldn't receive the level of education that they've got. Their speech would be a lot poorer, because they would essentially stop speaking, because they wouldn't have people around them who understand them. And so essentially every speech and language therapist has said, if you can continue home educating, then keep doing it, because it's of benefit to your children. And so, you know, we've just never really found a reason to not do it. Yeah.
I think never finding a reason to not do it is one which a lot of people would identify with. Yeah. You said so many things there, Mike, that were really interesting. But one was this idea that if it, you know, when you talk to other home educators who subsequently gone into the school system, and they said they didn't regret their time in home education, I think that's the really key point. But the obverse of that is entering into home education can feel like a really momentous change. You know, I remember our very first day in home education, and for my daughter, literally nothing changed. You know, what happened the day before just continued. And yet we felt this monumental responsibility to suddenly take control of her education. And, you know, and we went for a walk in the woods on her first day. And as we were walking through, I can remember pointing up at a tree and going, oh, look, it looks like a letter K, you know, and this looks like a letter A. And when I look back on it now, I think, how stupid was that? We were immersed in nature, walking around as a family, talking and, you know, naturally learning. And what was the point of forcing stuff, you know, forcing literacy on her in the middle of a forest? It was just, you know, because it was her first day in home education. And in fact, it was her 1500th day in home education at that point. So that was really great. And yeah, when you're talking about, you know, what your child would have learned in terms of speech ability in a school context. I mean, as a designer looking at education, I was really shocked at the idea of 28 or 30 kids doing the same thing at the same time in the same way, wearing the same clothes, and and not being allowed to speak unless they're given permission to do so. And I think as a dad, we're always a bit more kind of a combination of like really brave and campaigny, and protective of our family. But on the flip side of that, sometimes we can be a bit wary of kind of going against the grain and marking our family out as somehow unusual. But yeah, I didn't want my daughter to go into a system that was so collectivized like that. I believe just as like when you're getting, if you've got a heart condition or cancer or something like that, you get personalized healthcare these days. And I think that, the ambition must be that every child should get personalized education. And to me, home education was the nearest thing that we could get to that. So I was really pleased with the way things worked out. But we've also had our moments as well. And my daughter did ask if she could go to see a school, just because she had no idea what it was like. So we went to a school open day so she could just see what it was like. And she really liked it until she found out that those kids were having to do homework at lunchtime because they got so much of it. And then she says, "Oh, I don't think I want to do this."
I think that we have the same as well. Like some of our kids, I think they occasionally want to go to school, or just because they have no concept of what it's like, and they hear like their friends talking about it in after school clubs, and they just don't really get it. And so I think there is that kind of feeling of that fear of missing out occasionally, but I think that's an exception rather than like this normal kind of feeling in their gut that they really want to go.
Yeah. Oh, there's a question I can see. How do we balance all of our responsibilities? I think that's a good one because you and I work in very different ways, don't we?
Yeah. So I was thinking about actually this session beforehand, and one of the kind of real challenges for me is like having to context switch. So to give a bit of background, I work for an insurance company, and so since the pandemic have worked from home pretty much full time. I think I've been into the office maybe 5 times in the past 2 years, and my work is fantastic and they're really flexible. It's not like I'm chained to the desk 9 till 5. They've allowed me to compress my hours so that I work 4 days per week and have 1 day off. But with that great flexibility, it also offers its challenges. So because I'm at home and we've got 5 kids, and life just happens for the kids. They don't see it as the compartmentalized thing of like dad's at work now, so therefore I can't speak to him. So what I find is like in between meetings, I'll sort of be rushing downstairs for 10 minutes to quickly help my one of the kids with their maths, or this is no word of a lie. Last week I was on a call where I was presenting something and I was genuinely running down the street with one of my kids' bathing costumes on their way to the swimming lesson. They'd forgotten it. So I was running after the car to hand it over. And I think that that balancing act of like being a dad who's working, but also being at home and being present for my children is a real challenge. I think that they obviously have a recognition that mum does the majority of their work with them. So like we take quite a semi-structured approach, and like most of the time they're playing, but then we have some curricula that they follow, which is more just like so that we can feel like we are doing something with them. So Amy does a lot of that with them, and then I will pitch in and help out with these things that the kids aren't getting. When Amy's doing it with them. Amy would say, can you help explain this in a different way, type thing. But at the same time, you know, they're here and they want to just come and chat if they've done something. And I think one of the ways that we try and balance that is that this is something we've done over the last year. We've started introducing special time with the kids, so that it's one-on-one with parent and child for only like 10-15 minutes at a time, just so that they have that time carved out for them where they can connect with us. And so yes, I might be sort of running around like a headless chicken trying to do bits and things in between work, but also knowing that there are times when I'm like totally present for them and connecting with them in amongst all of the other busyness of life. I think having an understanding employer is a massive benefit, but yeah, it's a real challenge juggling responsibility.
That's really interesting, and I'm almost the complete opposite of that, because for the whole of my daughter's life, I've been self-employed, and so I largely work from home unless I'm with a client somewhere, and that would likely be just a day trip. So she gets to see me every single day, and she gets to see me several times. When I go down and have a cup of tea, I'll end up stopping and chatting. Often it's not always going well, you know, in terms of education. We all know that. Every teacher knows that too. I'll go down and I'll see there's a bit of a struggle happening, and so I get involved to try and help to move things on. And so it's that may sometimes result in me having to work a little bit later into the evening just to get through something which I've agreed to do. The upside, of course, with being there is I get to see her growing and developing. She sees me, and she, you know, I do worry about children. Their vision of their dad is a person who's just not there and then appears, you know, every evening and is there at the weekends. Whereas my daughter has got no conception like that at all. And the upside is that I, for instance, will go out with my daughter, and we have what we call philosophy walks, and we take a topic, and I'll pose a question about it, or you know, or she'll pose a question, and we just get into it, and just walk around talking about why the world is the way it is. I think most home educators know that some of the very best learning happens through conversation, and it's easy to you know, yeah, I would say rise to her level because she's so insightful at times. And so we do that, and I take her to a drama group, which is a Saturday thing. She does another one on Fridays. And if I can get away in the afternoon, I'll come across for that as well. And so while I'm not present, while she's doing her drama, I'm there in the car going with her, and afterwards we have some time together as well. Now, the real question, I mean, in terms of dads and responsibilities, is about finance. You know, virtually all home educating families have had to make a decision, which is that they will not be two-income families. You can't easily be a two-income family and provide a full-time education to your own children. So usually one parent has to give up work, and the other parent takes on the burden of making sure that all the bills get paid. And in reality, you know, most of the time it's the wife or the female partner who gives up the work. So it's important, I think, if in my line of work, I don't work every day of the week, but when I do work, I get reasonably well paid as a consultant. So I don't get paid at all when I'm trying to find new clients and when I'm doing my paperwork. But when I am working with a client, I do get, you know, a reasonable amount to make up for that. And I would say that we're able to cover the costs and go on cheap holidays as a result of, you know, living the way we do. I know another guy who does a night shift, and that's how he manages to be around for at least part of the daytime with his children. And Mike, you're out but due to COVID, you've been able to be at home much more than you would in other circumstances.
I think for me,
Yeah.
the finance responsibility is an interesting one, because I think that for a number of years, it almost became my identity as a dad.
Yeah.
That I was fully behind like the idea of home educating, and fully behind Amy being there as the primary caregiver. And so for me, I built a lot of my identity on, like, in order to do this, then I need to do as well as I can in my career to get paid as much as I can so that we can afford to do this. And it was only really in the last couple of years that I kind of came to realize that actually my identity isn't just the guy who provides the money to bankroll this thing. And I kind of built up this identity and put so much pressure on myself, and that really kind of, work and success in work becomes something of an idol, because like, to me, the ends entirely justified the means. But in doing so, I kind of had realized that actually I'd really lost the heart of the journey in it, and that actually I needed to kind of take that pressure off a little bit and actually be more involved with the home education than just providing the money for it. I think that it's really important to not lose sight of what you're doing it for and why you're doing it, because I think it's not uncommon that, putting home education aside, for a guy to build his identity in his job title. I think that I certainly found myself falling into that trap.
It's so true and so interesting. And the flip side, because two things for me. One is, when you're self-employed, it's really hard to say no to work. And so there was a time just before COVID when I was really busy, and I was becoming frustrated because when my daughter was 40, my daughter was born when I was 40, and I felt that I was likely to miss out on quite a large part of her life just by being that much older than her. And so I wanted to catch up. And that was a main driver for us as well. Going into home education was to see her every single day and max that time. And so when I found myself really busy, it was frustrating, because while I was doing that thing of supporting the family, and perhaps there was some kind of self-esteem boost of being in demand, then at the same time I was living my life on trains, going to see all these people, and I wasn't getting to do what I wanted to do, which was to have time with my daughter. And then when COVID came along, of course, the absolute opposite happened. And we were scraping along at times, and I was able to see a great deal of my daughter, but was often in a bad mood because I was trying to work out how to keep the wheels on the wagon. So it was quite some ups and downs in there, but the medium in the middle is fun, a great place to be. And the one other thing I just wanted to say about this was, in terms of the role of dads and how they're seen. I've been part of a little local community thing called A Bit of a Do, and the idea was born of this realization that when children look at adults, they see people who, first of all, are very serious all the time, and secondly, adults have all the right answers, and children are always being corrected and told how to do it right and how to improve. So the idea of A Bit of a Do was that as a group of families would get together, and anybody who went was kind of expected to perform, but there was no expectation that you would do it well. So what the kids got to see were adults having a laugh and not being perfect at stuff, but getting better in the same way as children learn to get better at stuff. So, and it's been always joyous thing, and it's brought such connection into our family and across to other families as well, to see each other doing that and support that. And so I think it's a really good thing in home ed that children get to see their parents trying. You know, they don't just see dad come in at the end of the day. They get to see things happening and from start to finish.
Absolutely. I think that's certainly one of the techniques that we use when engaging our children in learning is I'll come into when they're doing Spanish and I don't speak a word of Spanish, and they just love the play and the kind of foolishness of it all, that I would be saying these words that I think are Spanish, or I'd be trying to guess what a certain word is in Spanish, and they find it hilarious, and they don't even realize that they're kind of reeling off all of this Spanish that they've learned.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, my daughter still loves watching Peppa Pig, right? But she watches it like an art critic, and she explains color choices and this joke and how it was set up, and and why would you restrict her from from doing something like that? It's that's an example of me having to rise to her level because she understands it better than I do.
You've got another
going
question.
along with Amy's question here, I just we've talked a lot in this conference. There's been a number of sessions that have brought up the idea of like comparison and comparing children, but I think this is an interesting when you talk about the role of a father, and that's what you guys have been doing, how countercultural home ed already is, but then taking into the idea that, well, the role of a father has very kind of thoughts already attached to what that means in society. And so maybe you can speak into Amy's question about feeling frightened about the idea of breaking free from sort of the societal norm of like, well, this is what dad is. And you've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but what did dad look like for you as far as, okay, conversations perhaps that you have with other fathers out there that, this is kind of how my family, we look a lot different. Like, it's okay that I'm not working 9 to 5, or, what that looks like and feels like for you guys.
Well, I was just thinking there that, sometimes I find, like, for instance, in every county in the country, the local home educators will have set up a Facebook group where they provide mutual support. And it's quite common for a parent, typically the wife to say, I really want to home educate my child, but my husband or my partner is, really against it. And what can I do? How can I persuade him to give it a go? And when I see that, I often just write back and say, well, why don't you just ask him to give me a call? And I'm really happy as a home educating dad to talk to somebody who's thinking about it and just answer their questions one-to-one, because often they're thinking to themselves, if I do this, I'm separating myself from society. I'll be like a leper, a social pariah. And then when they get to meet other dads, they find out they're actually quite normal people, forward-thinking people. Often when I meet other home educating dads, I'm always impressed at the commitment they've made to their family, and to put their family first. And being a dad is about being brave and putting your family first. Now, we might wish that our children were the ones who were going to go on and be prefects and captain of sports and 10 A levels and things like that. That's the easy option, and it's nice to be able to boast. But in the end, you want your child to receive the best education they can get. And if the school system is not able to provide that suitable education to them, then you as a dad are going to step in and support anything else that will deliver that for them. And home ed turns out to be a really good way to do it.
So what I find is that when I'm in the office, or this was certainly the case pre-pandemic, that I'd work with a lot of other dads, and one of the kind of topics of conversation. Because I love family, so like when people tell me about their kids, then I just instinctively want to know more, like what their age is, like how things going, like how you find this or that. And so it's kind of setting up that conversation. And I mean, some people might find this a bit intrusive, but I just like to show an interest. And dads love their kids as much as mums, right? Like mums don't have a monopoly on loving children. And so when you get someone talking about their kids, it's like their heart is opening up. And I think at the age I am, and then a lot of the people that I meet tend to have younger children, like preschool or kind of coming up to school age. And one of the conversation topics that I find around that school age kind of decision point is always, I'm not sure how my child is going to cope, or I'm sure they'll be fine, but I'm a bit nervous about it. And I find that people just don't know that home education is a valid choice. And so that kind of decision point around school is just a really fantastic opportunity to kind of start sharing about home education and about our own story. And I found that a lot of people's eyes when are sort of open when they discover home education. I think, John, you used that phrase earlier, we discovered home education. I think that's genuinely the case for a lot of people, that they just don't know that it's a valid option. And in just sort of inquiring about their family and getting to know like how old their kids are and where they're at in terms of their family situations, then you can just start to slowly sow those seeds a little bit. Yeah.
It's an interesting idea because there's almost a campaigning element to that. I mean, I would come back to that thing you said earlier, Mike, that, you know, people who have tried it and then put their children back into the school system, that they don't regret the fact that they tried. They don't say my child missed out and will never be able to catch up. So, you know, for anybody trying to persuade a reluctant dad to try, they could say, well, you know, other people who've tried it and it didn't work out, they didn't regret it. And in fact, they're left with some happy memories. And in many cases, they consider it better. So why don't we just give it a go for a little while? And if it's good, we'll keep going. And if not, we'll reverse. And, you know, that would help. But yeah, when I meet other people and they ask me, you know, what's it like, then of course that little campaigning element comes in as well. I think it is really important to remember that, you know, schools are an option that you opt into, and you're not necessarily leaving the school system. You're leaving home ed when you go into the school system. So would it really be that bad? I mean, if you could say to a parent of a 5-year-old, well, just imagine that the school system started at 7, as it does in many countries in Europe. Well, would it be really that bad if we just carried on till 7? And I think, you know, you might in ways like that, you might be able to create some more space. But definitely, so I would suggest put the man in touch with other home educating dads, and they will be able to provide the reassurance that's needed, because I think that's what is needed. Yeah.
Sorry, I dropped out a bit there. Had you moved on to the next question?
Yeah, so Amy asks, what advice can you give to dads who are separated from their partner but still want to know what education their child is getting when they're not with them?
And you see this so often posted on the home ed forums, like Home Ed UK, and I always look at it and firstly kind of think I'm really glad that I'm not in that situation as a mum. Like, I honestly couldn't fathom how difficult that is, and I'm because like, to me, we do this as a team, and it's not Amy's thing, it's our thing, because we're jointly parents, and we're in this together. And I always look at them, and I'm really glad when I see other people answer that question, because I'm not sure that I have it in me to give any good advice.
I think this is the worry that may be reflected in this is that if the family has broken down, and the father may have left with some anger, and sometimes this can end up being used as a kind of a weapon in a fight between the separated parents, as to whether the child is being suitably educated or not. But we have to hope that, in this case, let's assume that maybe the parents have gone their separate ways, but of course that they both still love their children and they want the very best for them. And how would you provide reassurance to that father if, for instance, he felt it would be easier if the children were at school, but you're engaged in a absolute unschooling, completely unstructured education? So there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of tension within the family relationship to start with. So I think one of the best ways to provide that reassurance is through family contact, because one of the things which is routinely the case with children in home education is their vocabularies are vastly superior to those of anyone else in their age group, and the number of words they're able to use will be hugely more than would be used in a school setting, and so the quality of the conversations that they can have will demonstrate clearly that the children are knowledgeable. And then when it comes to something like reading, well, I think the evidence is pretty clear that if you leave a child to decide for themselves when they want to read, you are doomed to face in-laws, grandparents, neighbors, friends, all in a panic that your child, will be lost forever. Will never, can't even read, and they're 7 years old, and yet all of the evidence shows that when you leave a child to decide for themselves when to read, they pick their moment, and they learn very, very rapidly. And by the time they are about 11, they're on an equal plane with anybody who's been through the school system. But they also have a love of reading which goes deeper than that of children who had that forced on them, in terms of they weren't allowed to choose, when to learn to read. So there might be a period of 2 or 3 years where the child's not showing an interest in reading, and it may be difficult with that absent parent to reassure them, but the academic research is there. Harriet Patterson's book, I think it's called Relearning, Learning to Read. I've forgotten the title of it. Somebody else will know, but maybe somebody can paste it into the chat. It was an interview with hundreds of parents, rethinking learning to read. That's what it's called, and it showed this really quite conclusively. And Steiner schools, again, they encourage reading at a later stage than state schools, and it has no effect on literacy and reading ability later on. So that just leaves really numeracy, and I think, to be quite honest, most of us would not be able to pass GCSE maths these days, right? I couldn't, not without having to relearn how to do some of that stuff. Children are learning a lot of stuff which isn't all that important, and it doesn't take that long to pick up the skills in numeracy to pass a GCSE in mathematics. Not if you're 13 or 14 years old, and put your mind to it, no problem at all. So really, what's the rush? And in the meantime, you can have lots of play-based numeracy, which can be everything from baking, to managing a bank and counting your pocket money and things like that. So there's lots of ways of doing it, and there's lots of evidence that the children will find their way and catch up. But I do think contact time is the key to that reassurance.
I totally agree. I mean, I actually trying to put myself in that situation where there might be some doubts in my mind, probably a little bit of like angst and anger and like just those emotions that are kind of there because you're not there. And I think that if you have contact with your children, then I think that the evidence should speak for itself, and that you have children who are kind of emotionally in the best place that they're going to be, that they have that love of learning, and whatever your kind of educational philosophy that you're following. I think that having that continued connection with the children, I think is probably a key thing in that, and that is not kind of this tug of war between mum and dad over who's right or wrong in this, or like trying to, and I'm sort of thinking of this about when I talk to people who are very anti-home education, whether it's an ex-partner or not. I mean, there's added emotions into that relationship, but like no amount of evidence that you present someone about home education is ever going to win them over for the cause of home education. I really think that you either need to see the evidence for yourself in kind of the fruit from your children, or it comes relationally from kind of getting alongside someone. And like you said before, Sean, that community of knowing another home ed dad and be reassured by that.
Yeah, there was another question that came in. It was about the difference in attitude displayed towards mums and dads in home ed, and I think there's, I'm going to have to stereotype a little bit, but I think some women feel that they're accused of being like over worrying, helicopter parents. My child's too precious for school. That kind of thing, whereas dads, if you were imagining that there's this perception that because you home educate, you're possibly a secret abuser and trying to keep your child hidden. And the fact of the matter is that if you don't like children, then home ed is not for you, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And we do it because we love our children and we love being with them. So the kind of attitudes that I get, people don't quite know what to say. That's for sure. You often see them swallow a question that they want to ask, so I have to encourage them to speak. But generally, I get questions really which are more about the usual stuff, the socialization side of things, and can they read stuff like that. I think my wife does actually feel that she's probably more disapproved of. Where we have something in common is in terms of how the public sector looks at us. We feel very much that the local authorities look at us as home educators with a sense of disapproval, because we don't care to throw away our legal rights. We have a right to family life, and the quiet enjoyment of that, which means not having to tell them every day what we've done yesterday. And I get quite angry about some of the things which the government are putting forward, and the willingness of the government to use smears in order to achieve their objectives. So I've been quite involved as a dad. I've been quite involved in campaigning at national level for many years. Not as much this year as previous years, but I do as much as I can. And yeah, my wife has had to change our approach to home education out of fear of what the local authority will do if she can't evidence in writing things which my daughter is learning. And but my daughter doesn't necessarily want to display that learning in the form of a written report with the view to sending it to the local authority. And consequently, yeah, that means that we both feel that we're under this kind of disapproving scrutiny lens, and I wish we could just be allowed to get on with it.
Sorry. Yep. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, in my experience, a lot of the conversations that I have in the workplace are kind of veiled in professionalism. No one wants to directly call you out on something that they disagree with. So it's either met with kind of genuine inquiry as to what it looks like and how it works. And Sean, you missed the classic question of what will they do for science if they don't have Bunsen burners?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then some people are just perplexed, like they can't fathom a child not in school. I think socially outside of the workplace, I face just as much criticism as my wife because there's no veiled professionalism there, and so people will confront and question just as much, and particularly with family or family friends, they feel like they have a right to criticize our choices, and I think that very much depending on how the questions are put to me is whether I get on my soapbox or not with the research and kind of banging the drum with the legislation. If they're nice to me, then it'll be conversational and relational. If they're not, then I'll
Go on then, give us some examples of questions that you've had put to you then, Mike, and how Sean might answer it. Let's try a bit of role play there.
So the one that you get is like, so you mean they don't have to follow the national curriculum at all?
To which I would say, no school has to follow the national curriculum. It's a voluntary element. It just so happens that around about 45% of schools do follow it, and the majority don't. And if I was being on my soapbox, I would say, but you know, I'm actually really glad that individual schools are actually able to choose what children learn according to local circumstances and traditions, and for diversity's sake, because if we all learned the same thing, we'd end up with the same government forever.
But how do you measure that progress?
Oh, I see it every day by talking to her. I don't have to wait for somebody to send me a report. I see it every day.
And nobody's checking up on you to see what they're doing.
No, but I'd like to check up on them, because I think Ofsted's good because it tells parents what's happening in a school that they're not allowed to go to themselves. But you know, I don't need that, but I do like to know when a local authority is overstepping the boundaries and invading privacy and things like that. The rest of the time, I just want to be left alone. I would also add, if I wanted to, the statistics. The reason why nobody is overseeing this is because in 60 years of home education, there hasn't been a single incident of a person being killed and it then being found out to be because they were in home education and nobody knew about them. Where there have been unfortunate deaths in a very small number, the local authority has always known about them and just failed to do its job properly. So we don't need that scrutiny, and if we do, we want it from someone competent.
We could go on. We could talk about registers.
Yes, we could. But it's such an enjoyable session like this. One thing that we should say is that home ed dads don't often get to meet each other, right? And a forum like this provides a really enjoyable, very welcome opportunity to do that. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Mike, this year as last year.
We'll do the same again next year.
I hope so. Yeah.
Once a year chat. Huh?
Yeah.
I do have one question, and then we can open up to other questions. We have a couple more minutes, but another theme that has sort of presented itself quite often in this conference has been sort of the importance of looking after ourselves as moms, as dads, and like, you know, I'm curious for you guys to maybe speak a little bit into that idea of, I mean, obviously, with all of the stuff that you mentioned with local authorities and stuff, even more of a reason to be sort of on a united front with our partners, with our spouse. But then that idea of how do we feed each other? And in our family, we call it like giving each other life-giving opportunities. Kind of how does that play out in your family? Like, you know, how do your wives get those times that they, you know, can experience those things that they know that they were created to do, or like vice versa, you know?
Yeah.
So for a record, I think I would be rubbish at self-care, whether I had kids or not. So I think that for me and my family situation, I think it's just really kind of life-giving to me to have a wife who tells me when I need to go and take some time for myself. Like, because I know that I wouldn't do it of my own volition. For us over the past year, we've actually really transitioned as a family, because I was working the standard 9 till 5, Monday to Friday job. And then what we've done over this year is I've compressed my hours. So I now work 4 days a week and I have 1 day off, which allows Amy to go out and work for a day a week. And for her, that's what she really needs at this time, because we've been married coming up 12 years, and we had our children soon after we were married. So she's been a mum at home for a really long time now. And she's like, actually, I just need some time with other adults in a workplace. And so yes, she's going out to work, but for her, that's really freeing. And so that's been a really interesting journey for us over the past year.
Yeah, I don't think we've got the balance quite right, and that is because of COVID. It's forced me to spend more time doing work and seeking work, and Christine has lost the opportunity to go and mix with other home educating parents in park settings and places like that because of lockdown. And so I think there's been an intensification of all the relationships have become more intense. I do think a friend of mine once said to me that, you know, whenever you meet somebody, you know, there's you, there's the other person, and then there's both of you together, and each of those needs to be given their own space if you're to flourish. And so when children come along, that extends and it becomes much more complicated. But it's really important that I get time with my daughter. Christine went to the cinema with her yesterday, you know, first time out together for a little while. We all went on holiday together, and we try to make sure that our daughter gets time by herself as well. So trying to find space and time for each element of family relationships to be able to exist individually is quite hard, but it's really, really important. And yeah, I do feel very much for all mums who've had to get through COVID and that lockdown scenario in very, very changed circumstances with a lot of extra pressure. And now is the time to decompress.
Right, we've got just a couple more minutes. If anybody has a question to put in the chat, or you can just feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Otherwise, we'll wrap up here in a minute. This has been great. I love the fresh perspective.
It's lovely to see it from the other side as well, because as somebody who's always been a mum since 2005, I've not had that lovely experience of knowing the other side of the the wall, so to speak. So it's lovely to hear it from you guys. Thank you.
That's great. I actually I'm really appreciative to have been asked. I think it's an important topic, and it's good to see it being given a slot.
And I think it's really important, we have as moms our own spheres of influences, but, when the dad is an advocate in their own spheres of influences, it just brings a whole another dynamic, a whole set of, just spreads the word even faster, than just kind of the one front. So yeah, we really appreciate you doing that.
I agree.
I really liked like what you were saying, Sean, about it's not as though we're moving from school to home educating. You're actually moving from home educating. That's the starting point. I've never considered that actually we've been home educating, and then we send our children to school. It's like they're already successful. You're already successful in home educating before you've sent your kids to school.
Yeah. And the argument,
that's amazing, yeah.
The argument for monitoring home educated children on grounds of education and safety is bonkers, because we don't monitor people aged 0 to 5, right? And yet that statistically is a time when children are to an extent in danger, right? And that danger diminishes as the child gets older. So if you were to say to a parent in the street, oh, we'd like to come along, knock on your door to inspect your child at 2 and check their safety, get you to write reports on their progress, that's what we're being asked to do, right? Well, why would you start with us? In fact, it's a worry that they might be starting with us.
Especially as most abuse cases happen before the child reaches compulsory school age.
That's what I mean. It's more dangerous to be very young than it is to be mildly young. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Dore, do you want to finish us off?
No, I'm just want to thank you guys so much for coming along. It is great, as Amy said, to hear the other side, to hear the other perspective. And we really appreciate the work you guys are doing, within your own sphere of influence. It does add a different type of credibility to the whole aspect of home educating. And we certainly need a lot more dads flying the flag, for home educating. They seem to be the silent people in the background in many of these sort of environments. But I know my husband, he often talks about home educating, and he loves the fact that we are, and it's good to be on the same page. But thank you very much for coming along, for sharing your stories and showing your faces. And for the people watching back, I don't know if any of you have any specific links that you think would be useful for those people, or getting politically involved. Sean, you were talking about you've got some, is there any way that we can send people to learn more or to get involved themselves?
Well, obviously the 2 main charitable organizations are Education Otherwise and the Centre for Personalised Education. Both of them are very active in campaigning to protect our families and allow dads to choose what's best for their children. So those are 2 places to start. And I'm always happy to talk to any dad who's thinking about it and
right.
But uncertain. So I'm sure there'll be a way to connect me up if they want to.
Super. Thank you very much.